Hello, my name is Dr. Omar Kholeif, and I'm the Director of Collections and Senior Curator here at Sharjah Art Foundation. It's a privilege to be able to introduce to you today the exhibition Drawing Time Duets in Gallery 4 at Al-Murayja Art Spaces here in Sharjah. The exhibition really seeks to think about what does it mean to think of history through the medium of drawing, particularly the expanded context of what a drawing could be. First, we begin with paper, its porous material form, the pulp that is assembled to create a platform or canvas for ideas to be materialized. Expanding outwards from that to think about the different media that artists use on that paper. But really, at the core of this exhibition is a question, which is, what does it mean to think of archives? What does it mean to think of collections and their role within history? Several years ago, when I began working at Sharjah Art Foundation, the team and myself worked to think about what does it mean to look at the history of this place that has this incredibly rich archive of works? What does it mean to conserve, preserve, and create context around those works for audiences? One of the first things that we did was take works out of boxes, to see works of art that had rarely been displayed, and to consider how they could be put into conversation with recent works that were made by some of the pioneering artists of our time. I suppose what came out of that was that really the job or the role of a curator is very much a behind-the-scenes task, one spent in rooms examining the details of a brushstroke, the details of a movement, the details of a finger, the details of the place where an artist lived and their biography, to try and contextualize and understand the means for which they made the works. But there was a specific reason why we chose to anchor this project, a research project, Drawing Time, around the materiality that is imagined or conjured through the spectrum of what is drawing. The reason is that so many of the works in the Afro-Asian context, which consider or consist or create or demarcate the core of our holdings in our collection, are artists from that part of the world, is that they create works often on paper. Why? Because paper has a rich tradition that spans back centuries. And that tradition also comes manifest or alive in different ways. Sometimes an artist is working in paint, but they realize their work on paper, mounted onto masonite. It's called a painting, but actually it's a work on paper. And paper is fragile. It's subject to very specific light conditions. It needs to sleep and rest. But we also need to make sure that those works that sleep and rest are not forgotten, that they come back into the light and are imagined in new contexts. So as you walk into the gallery here, the team and I have worked on a custom-made scenography that begins to examine the idea of the duet, the double, the pairing. And the starting point for this was really imagined by investigation into the archives of the late Sudanese artist Omar Kholeif, who died in 1997. My colleague Souraya Kreidieh became obsessed about kind of disentangling the contours of this archive and brought many of the details to me, and we sat together with the rest of the team to kind of seek to understand or comprehend who was this figure that occupied or embodied two different personas. One as Omar Kholeif, the other as George Edward.
We realized that Omar Kholeif wrote different biographies for George Edward in different formats. So he used illustrations, he used texts that is exhibited in the show. And what I started to do is look into these illustrations to understand more about this duality. So when I started looking at the illustrations and trying to figure out the story of George Edward, what I realized through different comparisons is that actually maybe George Edward lived what Omar Kholeif wanted to go live and experience. So based on these comparisons, I tried to understand more the story and try to understand how this double works. We still have a lot to look into, but I think with this exhibition, a lot of questions remain. Mainly is why would Omar Kholeif chose George Edward, an Englishman, as his avatar. Did he see in George Edward a way to negotiate his identity or to establish a new one? Was George Edward his escape to unburden his real-life burdens and hardships? We conclude is that maybe George Edward and Omar Kholeif were a duet that lived in harmony together. They went through different experiences, and that is manifested in different materials, in their art practices. I would say that Omar Kholeif built his own world around George Edward, and maybe George Edward was his way out to the world that he couldn't access.
One of the artworks that we worked on was one of the paintings of Omar Kholeif. We expected that it's just some minor damage to the surface, some surface dirt, and we started in cleaning the surface dirt as much as possible. And then we found out through research that it consisted actually of different materials that were not as visible before. So for that example, Omar Kholeif used different type of colors. So he used watercolors, oil colors, and acrylic colors, all mixed together. It was also interesting to find that he used his fingers within painting this artwork. So you can see parts of his fingerprints in it, which is very nice. Also, the unusual techniques that he used to make the painting led to some current time issues, because when he mixed different materials such as acrylics and oil and watercolors, what happened over the years, and because it was not stored correctly or conserved correctly at that time, is we started to lose the pigments. So when we started actually to work on fixing these pigments and stabilizing them, we also found that he used, probably because of lack of money at that time, or he didn't have enough resources, so he used normal cooking oil within the artwork instead of using art oil kind of base. So it's this kind of things that just comes up during a conservation process that you will have to work on and just find solutions for it. Again, back to conservation basics, you need to stabilize it as much as possible without intervening with any kind of materials that would change the original fabric of the artwork. So yeah, I think this is one of the interesting ones that we worked on for this exhibition.
The idea of the artist living parallel lives or conjured imaginaries set the tone for a way for us to pair work together. First, we begin as we enter with a work by Kreidieh that has the words duet imprinted within them. We pass by the pairings of the Algerian artist Baya and her duets with animate forms of nature, thinking about the social stratification of a world where there is no hierarchy between the animal and the human. We weave from there into different corridors, into the biography of Omar Kholeif and George Edward, into the world of the interior notebooks of the late Egyptian artist Amal Innawi, to the works of the pioneering modernist Ibrahim al-Salahi from Sudan, to the animism of Farida Lashai's efflorescing horses that take form and flight on paper. We pause for breath. Different vistas appear architecturally in the scenography. David Kulwani's work from the early 90s, which seeks to capture the violence espoused in the topography of Johannesburg, captures our attention. Move forward in space, and we find ourselves again encountering Ibrahim al-Salahi. Two different portraits. One, ink on cartridge by the artist, a self-portrait juxtaposed against a portrait of the pioneering modernist Picasso. Putting these two works in conversation, we seek to ask the question, Who are the pioneers of modernism? And how is it that from within the bounds and contours of these galleries can we ask new questions about the figures who are most important to us, the individuals whom we choose to study in our art schools, in our preparatory schools, in our spaces of exhibition and context making?
One of the works that I find very impressive in the way the double is created is actually Brahim Salahi's Untitled, which is a work that has a frame within a frame and creates a world within a world within it. And Brahim Salahi used different figures and representations, holographic and human figures, and created what I see is a space, or a void within a void, if I may use this term. So I feel that on its own, that painting on its own is another way to show what a duet is in drawing or in art practice.
Further down, we hear the sound of Fiastor Gates singing with the black monks in a rehearsal, a duet of the song Amazing Grace. Chanting, trilling, moving back and forth through space, multiple temporal orders begin to collapse. This song, a song traditionally associated with worship, is also one that took on many foundational elements in the civil rights movement, but the context of its making actually dates back to the 18th century. The idea that a song or a context can be borrowed, appropriated, and reimagined throughout history, throughout time, is part and parcel of how this exhibition has been conceived. That aspects, works of art, vestiges of history can be taken and recontextualized, presented for a new form of imaginary to take form and flight. We pass by and encounter two different scenes by Timothy Donker, the British artist, espousing an emotional scene of violence that took place in the mid-1980s during race riots in Britain. And we pause for breath as we consider how drawing, how works on paper can present ontological, ocular perspectives of the world that couldn't necessarily be proffered by the camera itself. As we swing round, two seats greet us and invite us to sit down in front of two works by Claudette Johnson, a pioneer of the British Black Arts movement in the early 1980s, who has worked for over 4 decades. These two works form part of a suite of recent acquisitions from 2021 to the Sharjah Art Foundation Collection. The images of standing figures may at first resemble the artist's personhood, likelihood, her selfhood, but they actually are imagined contours that have been imprinted upon two different stitchers, two different reclining bodies that put here in conversation reveal to us different modes of thinking about how an artist can use portraiture, how an artist can think of themselves as a vessel to consider a topography of space, of detail of feature, of pigment and color, and to consider how paper warps and contours to different pigments, to different styles, and to different gestures. The exhibition, Drawing Time, Duets, is to be experienced like a slow, meditative walk. You can rush through it and then come back and out again. Enter again, pace slowly, and two works may capture your mind and keep you enchanted for an entire day, asking questions continually. But what does it mean to draw time? That question is for you to answer and for us to continue nourishing through the work that we do here. Thank you very much.